Chapter E, Section 10. The market is round. Mathematical principles of social sciences. 200 days of work in a lifetime. A gift from AI to humanity. This 2013 magnum opus, with mathematics as a bridge, integrates the social sciences. It not only explains the laws of the material world, but also touches the heart, telling us the spirit is a system that needs to be integrated. If we only build our hearts on changing matter, we are doomed to sway. This is the root of anxiety and confusion. But the truth is eternal. It should not be suspended in the air, but into everyone's heart. When truth becomes consensus, society will have the cornerstone to support the dignity and confidence of every soul. We will eventually walk out of hesitation and return to peace and firmness. The first chapter, the objective environment for innovation. The third section, the market is round. What is the market like? Looking through all Western classical theories, there is no accurate answer. What is the market like in people's minds? The description of the concept seems to be clearer and more accurate, but all concepts will eventually return to one starting point, the invisible hand. For example, the definition of the industrial chain in traditional classic theory, which includes 4 dimensions: value chain, enterprise chain, supply and demand chain, and spatial chain, forms the industrial chain. This docking mechanism is the internal model of the industrial chain. As an objective law, it is like an invisible hand, regulating the formation of the industrial chain. The essence of the industrial chain is used to describe a group of enterprises with internal connections. This description is not only lengthy and cumbersome, but also turns the actual controller of the industrial chain into God. Since it is God controlling, different people will have different understandings, leading to disputes. Such cases are widespread in Western classical market theory. A theoretical system based on the invisible hand is clearly further from science. To make breakthroughs in the market, we should first break free from the shackles of the invisible hand. With a brand new perspective, we can explore the market and lift a veil of God. This will bring us unexpected surprises. From a macro perspective, capital and savings, as 2 sides of the same coin, are interdependent. Capital self-reinforces, while savings self-weakens. Assuming capital and savings are initially 2 parallel lines of equal length, then capital growth outpaces savings growth. And over time, the money naturally curves, forming a pattern of capital outside and savings inside. This is the macro market outline. Similarly, since capital is an accumulated value, while GDP is an instantaneous value, the final capital return requirement growth rate will exceed GDP growth rate, VR, and GDP growth rate V2 will exceed saturated industry growth rate V3. So the capital return requirement growth rate, V1, will exceed V3. The capital return requirement is reflected in the operating costs of society. The operating costs are passed on to the industry in the form of labor costs and land rent. So the cost growth rate of the saturated industry is above the revenue growth rate. Under this model, the industry will naturally form operating costs, retained capital returns, and cause the industry chain to naturally converge, forming a closed loop. This structure is known as a monopoly. We can also follow the market's trajectory to prove this closed loop. A Chinese lubricants company aims to supply a certain car model and must obtain API certification. The European Automobile Manufacturers Association and the International Lubricants Association require OEM certification. All the certifications will be strictly conducted in engine bench test standards. The company needs to invest a lot before certification, and when it starts supplying, the certified models are already in the end of life cycle. New upgraded models are launched, with new oil grades required. Lubel companies need to do a second round of certification. This means the first round of investment has not been recovered, and the second round of loss has begun. So it's almost a bottomless pit. Theoretically, it blocks lube companies from entering the auto manufacturer's system and 4S stores after-sales system. But global oil companies enjoy an advantage of 3 to 5 years. So they've completed all certifications in their home markets with zero cost in China. This advantage will last. Also, when choosing a lead supplier, car makers have a double standard. Basically, German cars use German oil, and American cars use American oil. Japanese and Korean cars use Japanese and Korean oil. But Chinese automakers still lack core technologies. Eventually, they still follow international standards. So within this system, domestic lube companies bear the same certification costs, but only get a small share of the Chinese market. This unequal structure means local brands are stuck in a passive role. Continuous losses are not sustainable. But if the OEM channel fails, the lube company can only choose social distribution, like 4S stores and authorized repair shops. They also need OEM support. So, in the end, they return to the OEM. They still need to complete OEM certification and third-party certifications, like Asia and US. This entire process leaves the company's base oil R&D directionless, even if there is sales in some periods. OEMs have clearly required base oil purchasers, such as SK's hydrotreated base oil, that the path of base R&D is actually blocked. In this situation, R&D is useless. High-end base oil production is always in its infancy. So, the more we try to catch up, the worse the result. Like an invisible hand is holding it back. It feels wrong, but they can't find the problem. This is the common feeling of sales, R&D, and manufacturing departments. In the automotive industry, a technical intensive and manufacturing core area, the problems faced by this lube company, if carefully analyzed, are actually the same problem. There is a leading type called time. Time-based leading cannot be caught up. The reason why Americans lead is not to surpass the UK in the coal steam engine industry chain, but to establish its own rules in the international oil internal combustion engine industry chain. From an international perspective, when we regard multinational companies as objects to imitate and models of success, we are incapable of competing with our own future. So, if we can't catch up, how can we surpass them? This requires the latecomers to break free from the thinking of the leaders and monopolies. Step out of their track, allocate resources, and the next question is how to locate the track set by the leader. Only by finding the original track and making it clear and quantifiable, measurable, can we find the innovative track, following the thinking of the industrial chain. Comparing domestic lubricant companies with Mobil, Shell, BP, Castrol, and other brands, we can find that the commonality of multinational companies is leading net profit margin in the whole industry chain. The so-called leading means not only that the net profit margin of multinational companies is leading, but also the net profit margins of their suppliers, distributors, and end users are also leading. Meanwhile, multinational companies' commercial clients are potential progressive buyers, and their private clients are high-end user groups. Supply system, sales system, and client groups with leading net profit margin. Build a closed network. Even though Chinese manufacturing is fighting in local market, its rivals are not one, but a system of environment in the network structure built by multinational companies. The competition between Chinese manufacturing and net profit leading system is almost impossible to win. The path China's manufacturing industry has been traveled by multinational companies. All costs in China's manufacturing are transparent to MNCs. This allows MNCs to clearly calculate the marginal cost and profit. The profit of made in China is not enough to support innovation. Of course, in response, Chinese private enterprises mostly resort to squeezing employees to maintain profits. This has a second negative impact, which is that employees are overburdened with very little freedom, further locking in the probability of individual innovation. Social operating costs are uncontrollable for companies, and the rise in these costs inevitably increases the operating costs of the entire industry. The overall net profit of the industry will keep decreasing. The flood of costs will swallow the net profit margin of the entire industry. Only companies with leading net profit margins across the entire industry chain can avoid being swallowed by the flood of costs. This has nothing to do with the scale of the company. Larger companies bear a higher proportion of industry costs. Market risks are greater. And the only company with no risk is the leading net profit margin company, because the flood of social costs won't drown all companies, and leading net profit margin companies may not be the largest, but they are far above the market average. When the flood rages, leading companies suffer continuous losses, but instead, leading net profit margin companies can seize market share. Industry crises can turn into opportunities for them. Another problem for Chinese companies is thinking about solving all problems once and for all. They often confuse big and strong. They ignore the fact that the larger the scale, the higher the overall industry cost. When the cost of social operation soars, the flood of it. With the sharp increase in operating costs, what about the social operating costs? They will quickly devour leading domestic companies, pushing them to the brink of collapse, which Chinese companies see as an extremely powerful entity. But the reality is, PetroChina is a company that could go bankrupt at any time, because if the crude oil price falls below $100, it will face bankruptcy. Its revenue will be cut in half, but its costs won't decrease proportionally. Currently, its net profit margin is only about 5%, assuming its revenue is 100, and its total costs are 95, resulting in a net profit margin of 5%. When oil prices halve, its revenue will quickly fall to 50, but its total costs will struggle to fall below 50. This means continuous losses, and once oil prices plunge, its assets will shrink rapidly. In other words, the sale of assets won't be enough to offset the losses. At that time, the larger PetroChina, the shorter its lifespan in the crisis. China hasn't experienced a real crisis yet. So Chinese companies generally equate big with strong. But the reality is, they are two different things. In a consumer-driven market, pricing power is in the hands of companies with leading net profit margins. And those with leading can redirect social operating costs to them. And those leading in scale cannot redirect social operating costs to those with leading net profit margins. The same holds true for other markets. In the US auto aftermarket, during the 1970s, when urbanization was complete, oil prices skyrocketed. Consumers were eager to save. Jiffy Lube started with one store, and a decade later became one of the largest auto maintenance chains in the US. Jiffy Lube, rapid growth. In the auto manufacturer-led after-sales service system, maintenance is seen as a technical job, commanding high labor fees, and it wastes customers' time, wasting your own time, and various costs. In Jiffy Lube's rapid oil change system, maintenance is seen as a non-technical job, eliminating complicated procedures, waiting time, and only charging non-technical labor fees, thus greatly reducing maintenance costs. If the maintenance cost of the auto manufacturer's after-sales unit is 100, Jiffy Lube's maintenance cost is only 70. Jiffy Lube's maintenance cost is set at 75 to 95, which can form an absolute price advantage over the after-sales units of car manufacturers. Jiffy Lube and its peers should efficiently help consumers save money, gain market pricing power, and eventually become the market leader. This will lead the US from the repair era to a maintenance market, shrinking the aftermarket, and significantly reducing consumer spending. Due to the rise of chains like Jiffy Lube, Napa emerged as a one-stop supplier. During the crisis, Napa's stock price moved in the opposite direction to Ford's. In 1979, oil prices soared again. AutoZone began to open its first auto parts store. At AutoZone, labor costs for oil changes, tire replacements, and maintenance were completely eliminated, allowing consumers to directly obtain tools and do oil changes, tire replacements, etc. AutoZone also sold repair tools to consumers. AutoZone's core advantage lies in one-stop service. One-stop service differs from separate specialized services in that 前置所需支付的房租成本、人员成本大幅降低. Serving 100,000 car owners, specialized services require a rent cost of 10, while one-stop services require a rent cost of 1. The same is true for labor costs and other costs. It is under this absolute cost advantage that AutoZone rose rapidly. Later, Lubin began to decline and was eventually acquired by Mobil, the top US lubricant brand.
This acquisition allowed Jiffy Lube to reduce procurement costs. But the market didn't stop there. In the market, Mobil couldn't compete with independent lubricant companies like Pennzoil and Shell, which were more flexible and had more marketing methods. In 1973, Mobil saw an opportunity and began to launch full synthetic gasoline engine oil. Mobil 1 was born. But because its oil change cycle was twice that of traditional mineral oil, it saved one oil change time. Against this backdrop, once synthetic oil reached mass production, it would inevitably show absolute advantages over mineral oil. So seemingly more expensive full synthetic oil was actually cheaper. Facts proved Mobil's leading position in synthetic oil gradually gained the lead in net profit margin in the oil industry chain. Eventually, it shifted the channel cost burden of gasoline engine oil to Panzong, causing Panzong to lose money and be forced to merge with another leading oil company at a loss, significantly reducing the number of terminals and intermediaries and restoring profits. But the flood of social operating costs is still spreading upward. Eventually, it overflowed the profit margin of the Pennzoil Quaker merged company again, which was eventually acquired by KEP. The entire oil, lubricants, and aftermarket chain was disrupted, and the channels were restructured again as a pioneer was hindered by its own specialization and never expanded into a one-stop service. Although quick oil change was its signature, its single business had the same rental, personnel. Even after being acquired by Shell, it still couldn't recover profits. In contrast, Mobil, its aftermarket business unit was called Mobil Car Care, which had innovative services that were more than the sum of its parts. Its model advantage was unmatched by manpower. 1+1 meant lower rent and labor costs for consumers. But it has since become the No.1 chain in North America, taken by Walmart. In North America,
the number in Asia Pacific has grown to over 4,000. Looking at the changes in the US auto aftermarket, we can see only by helping consumers save the most and improve the experience can it be recognized and win market pricing power. The future is efficient and low cost. It's also monopolistic. Strip away all the fancy packaging. All costs are labor costs. The size of the aftermarket workforce determines the industry's efficiency. From the perspective of the aftermarket, the 12.0 version of AutoZone is one stop, but in reality, it saves more than any other model. From the perspective of the entire retail industry, Walmart's one stop far exceeds AutoZone's. The former business module includes the latter, so despite being bulkier, it will win the final victory. Beyond the physical world, Amazon's one-stop can also outperform Walmart's. Monopolies are criticized, but they are an inevitable result of market development, because only monopoly can eliminate unnecessary communication costs in the market, achieve scale and intensification, and help consumers save money to the greatest extent. Another reason for Walmart's success is its ability to bring cheap Chinese goods and labor to the US market. Throughout the development of the US market, the after-sales channels of US automakers had the funds to develop professional maintenance chains and the ability, but they didn't do that. Zippo obviously had the ability to develop auto parts stores, but it didn't do that either. It had the ability to develop the AutoZone model, but it didn't do that. In terms of the machine oil industry chain, Pennzoil, Mobil, and Shell also had the ability and opportunity to develop the AutoZone model, but they didn't do that.
Why?
The answer is that all companies fell into the trap of benchmarking based on core competence. They only focused on competitors and wanted to earn more money from consumers, but never tried to save consumers money. They always thought their prices were reasonable. This is what benefits the company, the thinking of I am the God, which turns companies blind. But in the future, including now, will be more like one stop. If Chinese companies can get rid of surface thinking and the core competitiveness thinking and find a way to help consumers save money while boosting net profit, that's the future. This will gradually drive the entire industry chain to a new level. Take a lube company.
if it gets rid of conventional thinking and stops pursuing mainstream channels. It can buy mobile synthetic oil and additives from Shell to produce the best synthetic oil and sell it online at a production cost of 120 yuan for a 4-liter package. Competitors sell theirs for 300 to 500 yuan, but if it's only on B2C commerce channels, it can be sold at 50% of the competitor's price, about 200 yuan, with similar performance, but 50% cheaper, with some promotion. It's going to be a big seller because the product sells itself. Through new channels, the company can successfully sell certified products to automakers, 4S stores, rent, marketing, etc. Can be dumped on multinationals after breaking free from traditional channels. Even with a 50% drop in retail price, the brand's net profit margin can exceed 25%, a significant increase, far exceeding my food no.1 says. The latter, with sales in both traditional and new channels, must calculate weighted average cost. So despite Mifu being tech and scale leaders, its net profit margin is capped at 5 to 10% by traditional channels. In other words, once the Luba company breaks free from the mold and switches to new channels, innovation will happen. Innovation leads to win-win for both companies and consumers, as sales focus on traditional channels. No matter how this local lube company adjusts, Exxon won't challenge. For sure, that fighting back would damage its own traditional channels. These channels took Exxon over $1 billion to build. In numbers, Exxon had 10 sons, 9 in traditional channels, 1 in emerging channels. This Chinese lube company, even in emerging channels, beat Exxon's youngest son badly. Exxon couldn't fight back because it had time bombs strapped to its hands. Next to the bombs were its 9 sons. If it fought back, it would blow itself up and kill its 9 sons. So logically, the industry leader couldn't fight back. That's the innovation track. Once occupying it, breakthrough is inevitable. Companies on the innovation track have market pricing power due to efficiency, and innovation should result in high quality and low price, which we have already discussed. The 7G market size is nearly 100 billion, and with a few percentage points, the Luber company can make sufficient profits and support the large-scale production of full synthetic base oil. Then comes channel building, synthetic industrial oil R&D and production. This forms a point-to-point, line-to-surface effect. Ultimately, it leads to a leading net profit margin across the entire industry chain. In the old market landscape, due to Mobil's net profit far exceeding that of domestic lubricant brands, the social cost deluge could only submerge them. By stepping out of the original track, the net profit margin of domestic lubricants exceeds Mobil's. The situation is reversed. The social cost deluge is now directed at Mobil. This case is generally applicable, and the rise of Tao brands lies in this. Innovation should help consumers save money to the greatest extent, rather than selling consumers on unnecessary packaging, specialization, and imposition. Based on the absolute leading net profit margin, adopt appropriate low-cost marketing strategies, and brand operations will be smooth. Share the benefits of innovation, high quality and low price, and consumers will also become the brand's biggest supporters and free promoters. Specialized marketing packaging is the result of innovation, not the reason for innovation. Many Chinese companies have fallen into the trap of pursuing specialization for the sake of specialization, and refinement for the sake of refinement, marketing for the sake of marketing, and packaging for the sake of packaging, disregarding consumers' interests, and companies can only wait for death. In this case, we introduced the concept of cost flood. In our inherent perception, we often think that the industrial chain is straight and infinitely extended. But in this case, we find that if the industrial chain is straight, there can be no dead stock. Since a closed loop has appeared, and it's always within the circle of car OEMs, the industrial chain is not straight, but ring-shaped. Otherwise, it cannot close. Similarly, if the lubricant brand chooses a new channel, then this new channel is also closed. The process of connecting the dots is the process of closing the loop. Therefore, we can generally think that the industrial chain is curved and closed. We study the loop structure and find that we can go from the auto industry to agriculture, and vice versa. From the automobile industry to the steel industry, and vice versa. We can go from the coal industry to the shipbuilding industry, and vice versa. We can go from the manufacturing industry to the logistics industry, and vice versa. We can go from the service industry to the manufacturing industry, and vice versa. The connection between all industries is not a single point connection. Starting from any point in any industry, we can reach any point in any industry. The closed-loop industry chain should be a spherical structure, very similar to the shape of the Earth. The intersectional impact between industries is reflected in the human cost, the rent cost, and social operating cost. This impact is isotropic. For example, rising housing prices push up the cost of living for teachers, so the education industry will shift these costs to students by charging higher tuition fees, which in turn pushes up prices of grain, thus compounding the cycle of positive feedback. Similarly, housing prices, education costs, and food prices push up the cost of living for white-collar workers and doctors, who will sign up for more tutoring and sell their products at a higher price to expand their income. Doctors will also increase medical fees to cover their living costs. These groups influence each other, so if one rises, others will follow. Social operating costs are capped at the highest point, which is constantly pushed higher. Conversely, if more and more companies innovate towards high quality and low prices, the cost of living for consumers will go down, and their freedom in life will increase, boosting their innovation ability, which in turn fuels innovation. We can see social operating costs as sea level. The difference between the two, while the latter is fixed, the former is rising, meaning that any individual company cannot control sea level. And the only choice is to increase net profit margin when innovation is blocked and social costs soar. People will overwork. They will break down goods and services and drive up sea level. Social efficiency will decline, leading to poverty, despite diligence. This is the typical feature through microdeduction. We still draw the conclusion that the market is spherical. The significance of this conclusion is that we can simplify countless variables in Western classical theory to a pair of symbiotic, measurable variables. Innovation aims to create high-quality, low-cost goods and set prices lower. Innovation should move outward instead of inward to create innovation monopolies and charge high prices. The real advantage of latecomers is that they don't have the traditional burden. They don't have to bear high costs of traditional channels when innovation leads. The whole society sees consistency in innovation. If this is achieved, even with the allocation structure unchanged, every doubling of the market will bring more benefits to low-income earners, possibly hundreds of times. This is because, assuming a low-income person currently earns 100, with 99 spent, leaving one for narrow, if innovation occurs.
Today, we will talk about Satan's revenge. This triggered everyone